Now, I promised you guys a follow-up of the EOS R5. I mean a comprehensive one, and I have already done 21 photo shoots with the R5 itself. So today, I think it's a good time to really talk about the R5 and how does it feel like as a camera for portraiture. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions. Before we start, let's take a look at this short compilation of photos of about 21 photo shoots. Now, I believe you have already seen the photos themselves. Now, the thing is that today I'll be talking about a follow-up of this EOS R5. I will talk about things that I really find useful in the photo shoot, the various parameters. But if you really want to look in depth, especially for things like dynamic range, synthetic tests, take a look at my initial review up here somewhere and go through it before coming back to this video, because this video really talk about how I feel about using this out as a camera for the purpose of photo shoot. Now, I break this up to many sections. In fact, I have my handphone here, right here. You can't see it's out of the frame, but pretty much there is a lot of content I want to cover up. And because I did 21 photo shoots in all sort of environment, outdoor, indoor with LED lights, indoor with flash, outdoor with LED lights, outdoor with flash, flash with field light. As you notice, there's a Godox here, and I talk about it using high-speed sync. I also tried various lenses. As you can see, this is the RF 50mm, RF 85mm. This is the Sigma EF 85mm 1.4, and this is the Canon Super Tele EF 200mm f2. Now, there are a variety of lens here, and I think all of them really brings out what's good and what's not so great about the EOS R5. So without further ado, let's go out. And if you really want to see all the various sections that I talked about, head down to the bookmark below, and pretty much I cover all of them in the video itself, all the various bookmarks. You can jump to where you really want. Now, without further ado, let's move on to the first section. It's about handling in the field itself. Now, handling in the field itself, I say the R5 is really a very nice and secure camera. It's a very small camera if you ask me, and the grip is really quite good. So when I was using the field, a lot of times, even with the 200mm, I'm just holding it by the camera grip and utilizing it. It's quite easy if you ask me. Surprisingly, after using it for 21 shoots, I find that the grip is really secure enough that I can allow a 200mm hanging off the camera. Now, I don't recommend that because I think that it puts a lot of strain on it, but other than that, I think it is a very nice to use camera out in the field itself. Now, the thing is that there are a few things that I want to talk about really when you use out in the field. Firstly, it's a good thing that they brought back the joystick. There's a joystick here. Now, this joystick is fantastic because there are a lot of times that you cannot use the auto AF points. I did talk about how good the IAF is, but there are times that you really can't use it, and moving the AF point is your only choice, especially for indoors. I'll talk about autofocus later. And if you ask me, everything else seems to be about there. You just program your buttons properly and they will be useful. Now, the flip out LCD is really useful itself, and the flip out LCD allows you to do really low angle shots, high angle shots, or shots from the waist level, so you don't need to strain your back. Especially with the 200mm, I like to do a lot of floor level shoots because 200mm gives you a very nice perspective, and having a tilt LCD like this is really useful. Canon allows two ways of utilizing the LCD. One way is that you can block this thing here. I can see here. Let me show you the LCD front. One way is you can block this thing here, and then it shows here, and block this thing here, it shows here. And the other way is that the eye detection will disable the moment you flip out the LCD. Now, why does it matter in the field itself? I think this setting is really a good setting because there are two ways to use this camera. First way, you may want to shoot at waist level like this, and the worst thing is, it keeps shutting off because the eye detection goes away. So by disabling it, you can shoot at waist level, ground level without deactivating the LCD at the side. So that is one way of utilizing it. So what is the other use case? The other use case I found out is when you want to check for autofocus accuracy in very bright daylight. In bright daylight, you really can't see the LCD really clearly itself. So a lot of times you need to see through the viewfinder. That is where you need to reactivate it. And even though, yes, you are flipping it out, you're looking at it, but you probably need to use the LCD to check for sharpness because this screen is just not bright enough in daylight. And that is something you need to note. Most LCDs, they'll just get washed out in very, very bright daylight. Where I'm talking about bright daylight, I'm talking about 1/8000 shutter requirement in using even a f2 lens. So those are really, really bright, and I personally don't recommend shooting in those type of conditions. But if you need to, the LCD is not a good way to check autofocus sharpness, not a good way to check for autofocus accuracy, and utilizing the built-in EVF is a lot better. Now, other than that, I don't really use the top LCD much. It really doesn't matter to me at all, other than to set my settings beforehand. And everything else doesn't matter too much. Now, in terms of memory card, I want to talk about it a little bit. Let me show you. I have both the SanDisk and the Sony high-speed SD cards. Now, the thing is that I choose to move to the CF Express for a few reasons. And that leads me to my next section, which is frames per second and a bit of responsiveness. So what happened is that the camera itself is actually really responsive and has relatively quite high buffer rate. These two cards, what it does is that it will change the number of FPS you have on the camera, and it will also change the response a little. So what happens is that if you're using the SD card here, you will get something like maybe 100 shots in 12 FPS mechanical, while in the CF Express here, you can get 220 shots with raw and shooting 12 FPS mechanical. In fact, you can see some of these screenshots here, and then of course taken with my handphone. Pretty much this is almost twice the buffer rate of this I would say as SD card itself. Now the question is, why do I use a CF Express over the SD card? I will tell you that the CF Express is actually not as expensive as you think. Why so? Because the high-speed SD cards here, in terms of 128 gig in Singapore, this is about $280, $290, while this is about $310. So the difference is only less than 10% delta difference. But in terms of response and buffer, this guy increases the buffer rate, especially if you shoot at 12 FPS, almost double the buffer rate of the SD card. And not only that, it also increases the response of the camera. So when you do take a shot itself, press the review button, it just loads. It just feels slightly faster. And not only that, it dumps out the photo a lot quicker on your computer. When I plug this in the computer, it gives me about 700 megabytes per second transfer rate. Literally, I can dump a whole photo shoot within 4 seconds. So I think this is quite a good investment. It's only a 10% difference from high-speed SD cards. And fitted in the EOS R, it really does improve overall performance. Now, talk about performance itself, especially when it comes to frames per second. I would say as frames per second, there is something to caveat. The thing is that the EOS R has different file size for different ISO, and just noticed that. So at the base ISO, files are like 20-30% smaller and compared to ISO 3200. Now that makes a big difference, because if you are shooting a base ISO with the EOS R5, you can, as I said, squeeze out nearly 230 shots before it slows down the buffer in mechanical. Now if you were doing that, however, at ISO 6400, it seems to only really to allow you to about 100 over shots, maybe 110 shots before the buffer gets filled up. And that's because each file is just slightly bigger, and this slightly bigger reduces the buffer significantly. Now, as I said, the CF Express does increase your buffer size, but that is only for mechanical, while electronic shutter, because I think it's filling up too fast, it doesn't really matter too much. With the SD card, the electronic shutter will give you about 65 to 68 shots, I noticed that. While with the CF Express, it gives you about 70 to 80 shots, maybe about 20-30% difference. Now, that still makes a big difference, because if you are shooting high-speed shot and you can afford lower ISO, I would say as the CF Express does improve your chance of capturing whatever you want by a good margin, because it gives you almost a second more buffer compared to 3 to 4 seconds is definitely a huge buffer difference. And that's about it for FPS. Now, the thing is, I shoot portraiture, I don't burst, and when I do burst, I only burst like maybe 5 shots or 8 shots mechanically. So it probably doesn't matter to me too much, but it probably matters to you if you are a birder or some sort of sports photographer. Using mechanical, I would say this guy is fantastic. You literally can have unlimited buffer shot. Now, there's one thing to note also, is about clearance of buffer. The clearance of buffer on this camera is quite consistent. If you use a SD card and you fill up the entire buffer, it clears about 10 seconds, 10 to 12 seconds. And if you were using the CF Express card, it will clear about maybe 6 seconds and 5 seconds. So 6-second clearance to shoot for 3 seconds or 4 seconds of electronic, it's actually quite good. In fact, my friend who birds with this camera pretty much has no problem with buffer itself. And I believe that if you shoot at 12 FPS mechanical, you will never run out of buffer anytime. So the next thing I want to cover, especially for portraiture, is IBIS. Now IBIS is really important because if you have seen my 21 shots just now, let me show you some shots. Some were shot outdoor, but there are quite a few shots that are shot indoor and shot maybe in really low light, like nighttime with available LED lights, especially for this shot, for example. And IBIS does matter because in those situations, if you can keep your ISO as low as possible, it's always a great thing. Now, there are a few ways to use IBIS. You can shoot with available light, like example, just now the shot I show you. Or you can also shoot, mixing of ambient with flash, as you can see in this shot here. Now, mixing of ambient and flash requires to also lower your ISO and try to lower your shutter as low as possible so they get maximum ambient. And when you shoot indoor, you may want also to do that, lowering your ISO and get maximum ambient itself. Now, this of course only works for post portraiture. If the guy is moving, it doesn't work at all. IBIS only helps you when the subject doesn't move. When the subject moves, no amount of IBIS can save your photos, just to note that. Now, in terms of IBIS, I want to tell you that there is some difference when you use native glass, EF glass, OEF glass with IBIS, and of course, EF glass without IBIS, example the Sigma here. Now, if you're using the new RF glass that has no IBIS, for example, this lens here, anyway, I have no RF glass with IBIS. So this is the 85mm and this is the 50mm. Both of these gives about effective up down to 1/10 of a shutter, at least based on my hand shakiness. 1/10 of a shutter gives me about 60 to 70% hit rate for RF lenses without IBIS, and using the inbuilt stabilization in R5, 60 to 70% accuracy, that's how I'll say. So when I do portraiture with them, I can shoot quite comfortably at 120, 130. Usually they have no issues that I'll talk about using autofocus and also shooting with IBIS a little bit later. Now, if I was to use the EF with IS glass, which is like this 200mm, I find that I can't do it below about 140. 140 is probably the limit, and I noticed that probably the R5 IS is not working in tandem with EF IS glass. So the EF IS glass is pretty much working on its own, and 140 is pretty much the limit of the rated number in the 200mm. 200mm is rated down to about 5 stops, but most people online, if you read effectiveness, is about maybe 3 stops, 2 stops, and I would say as it's about 3 stops effective. So 140 is good enough for portraiture purposes. Now with the Sigma glass, I would say as you lose about 1 stop compared to native glass. So the RF glass gives me, I say, down to 110 if you shoot static subject, and for portraiture 120. For the Sigma glass, on the other hand, I would say as if you are shooting static object, is 120, and if you are shooting non-static object, I will say as you have to push it up to maybe 130. Just a slight difference because the static and non-static subjects makes a difference, while between non-static subjects of the two lens, not so much. So I say it's 125, 130, and this guy is at least 130 to get a very sharp shot for the purpose of portraiture itself. That's pretty much sums up for IBIS, and if you are using the RF glass, it'd be fantastic. I would say as 110 definitely can get it. If you're not using RF glass, you're using EF glass, it depends whether there is inbuilt IS or not. Inbuilt IS glass like this 200mm gives you whatever the original IS have. It doesn't work in tandem. While if you are not using glasses with IS built in like this 85mm here, it is about 1 stop loss compared to the RF glass. Overall, quite a good IBIS performance. I mean, it's still better than no IBIS at all, right? Okay, so the next we'll talk about is shooting at autofocus itself. And autofocus is, I'll say, as a slightly tricky depending on what glass you use. Now, I'll say for the RF glass, I think because of the motor they use, their motor has a lot more stepping, it feels. When you focus in the field itself, you will never miss focus. I'll say as the AF accuracy for native glass is 99%, I'm sure about it, pretty much sure about it. 99% accuracy when it comes to that. When I mean accuracy is that when the point appears, be it IAF or you manually shift the point and move it on the eye, it doesn't matter, either one of them, as long as the box is on the eye or the box is on whatever you want it to be, the RF glass seems to hit a 99% rate. That is how good it is, especially when you use continuous AF, servo AF in Canon terms. Now with the 200mm, however, I would say there's a drop about, I would say it's 3 to 4%. I would say it's a 96-95%, which means when I did a shoot, in fact I did quite a lot of shoots with 200mm. Let me show you a few shots with 200mm itself. One shoot I normally do about 50 shots, and out of these 50 shots, I would say 2 to 3 would not be tech sharp. Maybe one will be autofocus. So I would say it's 95% accuracy for the 200mm itself, which is still a pretty good performance considering that it's an old EF glass. This is like a 2008 EF glass, even though yes, it's a super tele, but it's still a relative old glass itself. Now, just to note that because the EF glasses, I would say as the way they focus is slightly different, they feel very noisy compared to the RF glass. You hear click sound when you're using the EF glasses, like even the 200mm here, there is a lot of small little shifting around. Now the Sigma on the other hand, I would say as the autofocus accuracy is not great. When I mean great is that it is still way better than it was in DSLR times. It is still way better than it was using the EOS R. Now, when I was using the EOS R, Sigma lenses has about 60-70% hit rate. So pretty much every shot I must check for focus. Now with the EOS R5, I feel it's better. When I check the shots itself, it rarely goes out of focus. But I would say as the accuracy is maybe in the 80% range, 80% plus range, which means every 10 shot I shoot with the Sigma glass, 2 shot will probably be slightly out of focus or softer than I expect it to be. I'm guessing it's because of the stepping, especially this is a relatively old glass. This 85mm is a slightly older glass than the rest. And the stepping of the internal USM motor is just not as good. So when I do IAF here, there tends to be a slight shift forward or backward on the iris, while on the RF glass I don't have such problem. And even on the 200mm EF glass, super tele lens here, there is also not much of those issues. So overall, this is the autofocus performance. Now in terms of autofocus speed, they are as fast as it gets. I would say as all of these lenses here can pretty much catch a person running. It's just the accuracy, especially for the Sigma itself, the accuracy is not as high as the RF glass or the super tele EF glass here. That is pretty much, I would say, as when it comes to autofocus, especially for servo autofocus, accuracy itself. Now, just a note, goes back to just now the IBIS AF thing that I was talking about earlier. Now, when you compare AF and IBIS, you are trying to shoot in low light and get autofocus correctly. So regarding that point of itself, especially when it comes to servo mode, I noticed that with the RF glass, you can actually go as low as maybe 140. You can still servo at 140. Normally, it's quite stable and you will get the shot with IBIS and stuff in low light. Now with the EF glasses, as I said, they have a lot of stuff. It shows that the AF motor is trying to compensate small little movements back and forth. For the 200mm, it's not that bad. I would say it's 150, 160. But for the Sigma, you can really feel it. And in fact, I don't feel safe anything below 160 for the Sigma. It just doesn't feel that right because there's a lot of click, small little minor adjustments here and there to get the shot unless you are really stable. So overall, if you're using servo AF, especially for low light wise with IBIS, I would say as the RF glass is good for 140, while the EF glass, try not to do it. Use one shot unless you got more than 180 shutter or 190 shutter. 160 shutter is really pushing it a little bit. Now, there's one more thing I want to talk about in autofocus, and that is when it comes to IAF. Now, I don't record my screen. I pretty much don't record my screen itself. So you have to take my words as it is. Now, IAF, after extensive testing with 21 photo shoots, cosplay, non-cosplay, all sort of way, I would say as IAF works for about 60% of the time. So it pretty much still holds. Maybe it does mean that every 3 shoots, 2 shoots will probably work with IAF pretty much. And when I mean work, I mean I can even do it on full auto if I want to. And then out of the last 40% itself that doesn't really work, 30% normally can be solved by using the manual AF box, the initial AF on focus, initial AF on servo or tracking. I think that setting itself. Usually that box will work. Just move the AF box onto the person's face. It can track the eye pretty much okay. Now the last 10% really don't work and you have to shift the AF point yourself. Case in point is this photo shoot here with Marshu. This is a cosplay photo shoot. Because the person only has one eye exposed, it doesn't really work. It really doesn't work at all. Pretty much you can say the whole shoot I have to shift my AF point manually. Now, I also noticed that the brightness of the scene does affect your IAF. So when I was doing a lot of my indoor photo shoot with available lighting that shoots at about 150, 180 shutter, I noticed that IAF don't work as well. A lot of time I have to really choose the point manually, especially like say this shoot here. What happened is that most of the AF point were moved manually. Maybe it's a haircut, I'm not sure. But pretty much IAF didn't really work well in that shoot itself. So just for the purpose of moving the shoot forward quicker, I had to use the manual AF point on the person's eye. That's about it. Most others say 60% of the time IAF works, the other 40% doesn't work really well. You either need to start off with an initial servo point, or if not, you have to go full manual AF point selection in many ways. But as I say, the accuracy is still there. As long as the box is on the eye, 99% for RF, 95% for EF, super teles, and for Sigma is about 80%, just to take note on this AF point, especially for the R5. So the last thing I want to talk about is image quality. And image quality, I won't dive down into sharpness. So I will cover two aspects of it, and one is dynamic range and the other one is color. Now, dynamic range, I'll show you some photos, and color-wise, you have to take my words for it, because pretty much I have no good way to show you color itself, right? I mean, color is based on personal editing. So let's first talk about dynamic range in terms of image quality for the R5 itself. The dynamic range of the R5 is pretty good. I have done a lot of beat shoot. In fact, you have seen my shots. I tell you, all my beat shoots did not use any form of flash. It means that I'm having blown highlights and recovery of shadows is pretty much a necessity in almost every single beat shoot I did. Now, in fact, case in point, you look at this shoot with Outer Saber. She was in the swimsuit version itself. It is really, really dark. She's like severely underexposed by 3-stop, while the background is severely overexposed. I would say as highlight recovery, as what I've said in my earlier review, is about 1 stop, while shadow recovery, 3 stops will still retain the color pretty much. 4 stops is okay, 5 stops will have a color shift. And for skin tone itself, I would say it's pretty much stable. 2 to 3 shots of shadow lifting will pretty much give you the color back. It will just induce noise. Noise is not very intrusive. You can look at some of these shots here. I zoom in 100%. You can see some noise. Not a big deal really. Unless people are going to print A1 or A0s. Even if you want to print A3s, you just apply a bit of noise reduction. I think it pretty much solves the problem. So in dynamic range wise, the important part is retention of color, and of course the noise itself. As I said, noise is not that big deal. It's about more of retention of color, and so far I'm quite pleased with the R5. I would say it's because I come from the GFX series of camera. I tell you that the reason why I was in the GFX series to start with is the retention of color. Now the R5 does pretty well. I don't have so much weird color tinting, especially blue tint or purple tint itself. But that being said, I still find that the dynamic range of the GFX slightly better. Slightly better, it means that when I leave shadow, pull highlights, I have a little bit more leeway, a little less noise. And I would say as the color itself feels a bit more right. I can't really describe anymore because it's when you're editing, you can really feel the difference between the different camera systems. The GFX is still the best. The R5 is probably a second place. Probably much on par with the A7R4 when I last tested it. So dynamic range wise, that is pretty much it. Now in terms of color itself, I would say as the editing of the R5 surprisingly is very, very good. I mean very good as in you have seen my 21 photos here. I would say as none of this set of photos took me more than 5 to 10 minutes to calibrate the initial color point. And that is really important because when I was using the Sony A7R4, I had to tweak a little bit. It's not that hard, but I just tweak a little bit. And when I was using the EOS R, my initial color state was really bad. The EOS R always had this really greenish, yellowish tint that I didn't like. The R5 didn't suffer such a problem. The GFX is the best out of the gate. As long as I use one of the base profile, it works pretty much well. And so if you ask me to rate today in terms of color out of the camera by personal experience, which camera has the best color to start off the edit, I would say the GFX is first, the R5 is second, the A7R4 is third, followed by, I think, if I'm not wrong, the Olympus is 4th, Nikon is 5th, and that is my personal experience. I also did a Panasonic, but I forgot where it lies. I think it lies between the Olympus and the Nikon itself. Now, the lowest camera, I would say, is the EOS R. The EOS R initial color was really yellowish. I don't know how to say. It's really weird. And that's pretty much the reason why I didn't use the EOS R that much. So pretty much for color-wise, the R5 is a good second place to me, and definitely I prefer it over most other systems I tried so far, and maybe that's the reason why I bought it so fast. The A7R4 is also a good third place. I think that if with the R5 A7R4, I think you won't feel any worse off. definitely it's a good buy either way. And that's about it for image quality. Okay, I'll cover last one, is flash. Now, if you're using the EOS R and if you are using Godox flashes, 104,000 normally result in some sort of weird ass bending that will result in the field light or the HSS light to have weird lines. But the R5 doesn't have such a problem. So pretty much, if you look at the online forum, one person was highlighting that the 5D Mark IV have no such issue, but the EOS R have, and it happens above 1 to 4,000 shutter, and the R5, I'll say, is very safe. Look at this shot here, it's done with 18,000. I feel like there is no bending. So the R5 is a perfect camera today for the purpose of utilizing flash, high-speed sync outdoor. Now, there is one thing about flash I want to talk about the R5, I think on Canon camera on general, that really irritates me. What happens is that the camera will try to act smart and try to assume that you're using flash throughout the entire scene and just make it to whatever they feel like, whatever brightness they feel like, and it's totally screwed up. I would say as the R5 biggest patch requirement to me is to incorporate exposure simulation while using flash when I use them, because if I'm using high-speed sync, I need exposure simulations. When I'm trying to feel like I need the exposure simulations, not every day do I want to be a non-exposure simulated setting, because that is good for studio shoots, especially you can see this studio shoot here, but that's pretty much bad for anything else. And pretty much this is my entire follow-up of the EOS R5. As you can see, all these are the equipment I use with the R5, from CF Express to different lenses to 200mm. I've done it pretty much in the last 21 shoots. If you have any questions on the R5, do put down below. But if not, stay tuned for my last part, which is how I feel about the R5 and should you actually get it today. So I think if you have sit through my entire video itself, and this is pretty much the last part, so I will tell you that the R5 to me was fantastic. Now, I come from the GFX 100 scene. The GFX 100 is a fantastic camera. I'll tell you, the optics are really, really fantastic. The output, the sensor output of the GFX 100 is really phenomenal. Now, even disregarding GFX 100, GFX 50 itself has phenomenal output itself. But really, what pulled me into the GFX system is the really, really insanely good lenses that has no form of aberrations, no CA, and really very minimal flaw if you ask me. Now, you may say that Fuji actually applies auto correction, but I can tell you that if you try to use any of the EF lenses or the RF lenses and do auto correct, you cannot correct it still as good as the Fuji lenses themselves. So whatever Fuji is doing, I would say is fantastic when it comes to corrections of aberrations, be it in terms of CA, loca, or lateral CA or longitudinal CA. Fuji lenses are just fantastic themselves. Now, it pretty much goes to why I came to the RF system rather than buying the Sony. I'll tell you that Sony is a good third place, and pretty much everything that the R5 can do, I would say the Sony A7R4 can do, and it can do it cheaper because the A7R4 today is about $1,000, 1,000 Sing dollars cheaper than the R5. So why the R5? And I tell you that the EOS R has the best lens today for a full frame camera. As you can see, I've done this review channel. I pretty much went through a lot of lenses itself. The Sigma 85 here, which is the yesteryear sharpest lens. And then I went through like Nikon, Sony itself. And really, the only lens that felt great after the GFX system was the EOS R system lenses. The RF system lenses are phenomenal in every way. If you own any of the RF lens, I'm not saying adapter, you can use this adapter here. But if you own any of the RF lens, you should get the R5 or at least the R6. What happens is that you are really getting the best performance out of your lens today. With the increased dynamic range, the improvement of the AF, and really all-round performance improvement across the field, and the increase of megapixels to 45 itself, you really maximize all these lenses here significantly in every way. I'll tell you that this 50mm here, after a lot of testing, outperforms the Sigma 85 1.4 easily when it comes to sharpness, and pretty much pass it or even slightly better than it when it comes to aberrations. That's how good the RF lenses really are. In fact, the only reason now I'll go back to the GFX system to use it occasionally is really because of dynamic range. If not, I require a non-aberration lens. And why is that important is because if you do very bright daylight shoots, especially in places with silver lining, with balls of light, you really need a lens with no aberration because it will tint your color and it looks really disgusting. The R5 pretty much represents what I feel is the gold standard now for full frame camera when it comes to overall system image quality. Because in a system image quality, it's not just about the camera itself, it's also about the lenses. And definitely the EOS R lenses, the RF lenses are phenomenal, and together with the R5 you really maximize it. So if you own any of the RF lens, 85, 50 or even the 2870, you should buy the R5. Really, you can see a difference. You really can see and feel the difference compared to the EOS R. Now, that being said, if you don't own the RF lenses, on the other hand, I would say you can probably consider the Sony system. Now, I'm not a very big fan of Sony because I don't really like the color. Yes, it's the third best to edit color, better than Nikon if you ask me, but I just don't like it personally. However, from the objective standpoint, the Sony system is fantastic. Lenses are very mature. Today, Sigma builds lenses for them too. Pretty much you can get a very good outfit in Sony at a fraction of the R5 and the RF lenses cost. Now let's take a put into perspective is that the R5 today in Singapore costs 5,700 or 3,900 USD, right? And this 85mm lens here costs I think 3.4k Sing dollars, or in the US I think it's about 2,700 USD. Now you could get the same setup with the A7R4 and the latest Sigma 85 1.4 DN lens. That is probably, if you ask me, I have not tested it yet, but based on all the pictures I've seen, it's probably better than the old Sigma, but maybe slightly lousier than the RF 85. But the cost itself is really, really low. I mean, the brand new price of that lens in Singapore is 1,700, I believe, and the A7R4 is about 5,000 Sing dollars. Add together, they are about 6,700 versus a 5,008 and then 3,004, which amounts to about $9,000. You are saving a good 2.3k, and that translates to about 1.5 UK USD if you ask me. And really, if you ask me, you really can't justify using the R5 from scratch, if you ask me. From scratch itself, if money is an issue, or should I say, if you do not want to spend all the way to the end, right, get the Sony system, because the Sony system is just more cost efficient today. And not only that, you can buy a lot of second-hand lenses, second-hand stuff for the Sony system, which the RF system doesn't have any now. Try to find an RF 85 second-hand, it is really rare as heck. So overall, if you own any RF lens, buy the R5. If you don't own any RF lens and you are open to any system in this world, get the Sony. If you own EF glasses and you want the latest camera, you can consider the R5 or the R6, but I would say it's not really a major consideration. If you need the AF speed, however, get the R5. If you don't need the AF speed, the Sony cameras with adapters can pretty much do it well. Now, talking about adapters, this adapter here is given for free because when I was buying the EOS R, it is given for free. If you are using the Sony camera, the adapters are really expensive, 300-400 USD, while this adapter here from Canon will cost $99 USD or maybe 130 plus Sing dollars. Works really, really good, and you get almost native performance, as I said earlier. 95% hit accuracy, fantastic all the time, regardless moving or not. So overall, my R5 review is that for the portrait photographer, the R5 is a fantastic lens, assuming you own the RF lens or really, really good EF glass like this 200mm here. The R5 is phenomenal in every way. Now, if you don't own like the latest RF lens, you don't own the super teles, the really good lenses of the EF mount, I'll say as any other system probably can suffice for you too, especially the Sony and the Nikon the new Sony and Nikon systems pretty much can do the job very, very well. So overall, the R5 is a fantastic camera, one of the best in the world, but starting from scratch is a bit too costly. If cost is no objection, image quality is your top concern, performance is your top concern, get the R5 and the RF glass. If cost is a concern, consider looking at the Sony system, consider looking at the Nikon system. And that is pretty much it for today. It's a bit long, it's a bit slow, but I think I should really share with you guys all these things, because after reviewing so many cameras, I have to really honestly say I'm not a video shooter, so to me the video function in the R5 is relatively irrelevant. However, if you were to buy a system, really, cost is a concern, and definitely the R5 today is just way too costly. Maybe the day that they drop this price and they drop the RF glass, go ahead and buy the R5. Maybe my opinions may change then. I will recommend that you buy the R5 straight ahead. But if not, really consider the cost and consider what you want, especially out of a camera system. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit long. Do like and subscribe my video for more information. In fact, as I said, this is probably the last follow-up. I will talk about some other things like the review of this 85 Sigma on the R5 itself. I'll talk about some other stuff such as, how to edit your face better, edit your models better, make a better portrait. I'll talk about those things in the future videos. Recently, I'm just too engrossed in using the R5, taking photo shoots. I don't have time to create much content. But I hope you enjoyed this video itself. And if you have any questions, on the R5 or you have any questions on doing portraiture, do put down in the comments below. I'll try to answer it, and pretty much I will definitely answer it as long as you don't give me just a generic comment like "great job." I think that is not good enough to give you a good comment backwards, right? That's pretty much it for today. I hope you see you next time. Bye bye.